I'm Ali and I'm going to show you how I made this dress I'm wearing. The skirt is a full circle and I've panelled it all to look like a flower. I'll show you how I worked out how to cut each of these pieces and how I put the whole dress together. So you can see a little bit more clearly with it laid out like this. This is the waist here, and then each petal is basically the length of the skirt. The midpoint is about halfway down, and then I've literally drawn each bit in, and I will show you now broken down how I drew each of the shapes. So there's 8 of these petals, so 1/8 of the skirt is what I'm drawing, and then there's 8 of the orange ones, 16 of the green ones, and 32 of the little white ones. My original plan was to make a plain red top, but once I had the skirt made, I couldn't resist doing exactly the same for the top. So I'll show you how I worked this out for the top. The back's exactly the same. I'll also show you what the first version of this looked like, which wasn't quite as good as this, but it shows that you've got to just play around with it when it doesn't look right. So the first thing I need to do to work out all of this pattern exactly to scale is I need the length of my skirt. I need this measurement here. So I've got 8 of these petals. So this is quite simply 1/8 of my waist measurement. I then worked out roughly kind of what proportion I wanted this lower bit to be. So I didn't want that to be too small. So if I show you here, the total length is 59 centimetres. And then this here is 28. This is 31. So this is just slightly bigger than half. So if you want it to look like this, just find the halfway point and then you just need to go up a little bit. So if you imagine these petal shapes continued all the way up, they would meet at a point here, which if you think of your waist as an inner circle, if you know how to make circle skirts, you'll know what I mean. You imagine all these lines joining up, they would meet the centre of that circle. So what you need is this radius of this inner circle. So to do that, you just need to take your waist measurement, divide it by 2, and then divide it by pi, which is 3.14. So for example, if your waist measurement was 80 centimetres, just divide it by 2 and then divide it by 3.14 or pi, and that gives you 12.7. So that would be your radius there if you had an 80 centimetre waist. So the last bit I need to work out is the width of this, and then I can work everything else out flat on the pattern paper, which I'll show you in a second. So I need the exact measurement of this radius here, this imaginary bit we did, plus this bit here to where I want to work it out to. So this measurement from the imaginary bit there to this point here, if I'm measuring it absolutely exactly, is this number here, 40.76 and more numbers. So what I then need to do to work out this is I need to multiply it by 2 to get the diameter. I need to multiply it by pi, or 3.14, and that gives me the measurement all the way around the whole circle. But obviously we've got 8 petals, so I divide it by 8, and that gives me pretty much 32, and that is the measurement from here to here. So at this point you've got your measurement going down, you've got your measurement going there, and you know how long your skirt is. So the next steps will show you exactly how to work out the rest. So the first thing I did was I drew out my exact pattern of how I want the flower to look to scale. So this is just an A4, or if you're in America, I think 8 by 10 inch piece of paper, just drawing it all to scale so I can plan out how the petals are going to look. So I started by just dividing it into 4, then into 8, and then I've gone halfway between each of these. So I've now got 16 lines, and then I'm just drawing on my outer circle by making sure that it measures exactly the same from that centre point to the outside of each of these lines. And then once I did that, this is where I'm now measuring up to the middle of the petal that I just showed you. So it looks like it's below the halfway point,
which is different to what I said, but it's because you can't see the inner circle of where my waist is going to be, because I didn't draw that on this plan. I'm just drawing the general shape. So I'm just filling out the edge. It doesn't have to be perfect, it's just so I can kind of visualize how it's going to look. So that's the outer circle, and then I'm drawing all these little bits in to show where the centres of those are for when I end up drawing the extra petals and the leaves. So now I've got all those bits, I can start filling in the shape. So these are the outlines of the main red petals, the biggest pieces. So I'm going to draw those all the way around. And then once I've done those, I can fill in what are the orange pieces. So they're exactly the same size as the first lot that I've drawn. And then once I've done those, I can fill in the little bits in between, which are the little green leaves. And then all of the bits on the outside of that are the white bits, which form the edge of the skirt. So now I'm going to start drawing it to scale. So I'm measuring out the total length of the skirt, and ignore this little bit here. This is a mistake that I don't use later on, so you don't need to do that. So I now need to draw the centre line. So this is down the centre of the large red petal, and it's half the width. That's now the total width. So the top to the bottom line is the width of the red petal, and I'm now drawing in 1/8 of my waist measurement at the top. So these are all the measurements that I showed you a minute ago, and I'm now drawing down to the point of where that widest bit of the petal is, and drawing in that at the top. So basically each of these red petals will join together on those lines, and this is now the curve at the bottom, the point of the petal that touches the hem. So I need to make sure it's perfectly symmetrical, so the easiest way is to just fold it in half, and then I'm just tracing over that shape so it's exactly the same both sides, and you can't see it here, but I'm just tracing it through onto the actual pattern. So that's the red petal done, and I'm now just tracing the whole petal. You'll see why in a second. So I just need to trace that and cut it out, and then that means I can lay it next to the original petal that I've drawn, so I can see how it then looks on the skirt. So you can see now it's starting to look like the original plan. So I'm just drawing that shape in there. It only needs the little bit at the top and bottom for me to be able to then do the other petals. So I'm now drawing a line at the waist which is perpendicular to the seam line of those red petals, and this means I can line this one up, which is going to be for the orange petal at the bottom. So I'm just tracing around that both sides. Unfortunately you can't see the bottom because it's cut off, and I'm just filling in the waist to make it now rounded rather than being straight lines or an octagon. So now what I'm doing is I'm finding the centre point between the red and the orange petals at the tips, and then I need to measure down from the waist the total skirt length, and then that gives me the end of where the little green leaves are going to go. So I'm lining that up on that line and just drawing in that shape for the green leaves. And then the last bit that leaves me to do is the white bits at the bottom. I'm just shading these in so I can see the difference where the join lines are on all of these when I come to cut it out in a minute. So once I've done that, I just need to fill in the white. So I'm just measuring from the top to where the hem is, and that shows me where to draw the bottom edge of my skirt. So that's my hemline there, that's the actual finished length. And then I just need to write on what colours each of these are so I don't get confused once I've cut them out. So these are each of the shapes that we have, just so you can see it really clearly, and this is how many we need. 8 of the red and the orange, 16 green and 32 white. When I went to find fabrics for this, I absolutely loved the red and the orange, and I loved the white around the
outside, but I couldn't decide on a green. And then when I looked at these different shades, I thought it adds so much more interest to the dress to have these little extra bits. So I bought little bits of all these shades, and then I'll show you how I added on these little extra bits. And I love that there's just the tiny little bits of the really bright colour, the really dark colour. So let's now start putting all of this together to make the dress.
So the first thing I need to do is just cut out all of my panels. So I've added a seam allowance on to make it easier because there's so many to cut out. So the reds, and then these are the oranges for the next petals. And then I've cut out 2 different shades of green for the leaves. And then finally I've cut out 32 little white bits. So I've folded that fabric over a few times so it doesn't take all day. And because I'm always curious, I have to just lay it out to see how it's going to look. And I really love the way that all these colours are looking together for the petals and the leaves. And I've just put little tiny bits on of the other colours to get an idea how I'm going to do those bits. So these are all the green leaves. You can see I've got more of the light ones than the dark ones. And I'm just laying a piece of the light one over the dark for the little extra bit I'm adding on. And then these pins show where the edge of that is going to be. So I just flip it over, and then I'm marking now where the actual seam needs to be, and then just pinning it on ready to sew. So you can play around with different ways of just adding a bit of extra colour on these bits just to make the pattern look a little bit more interesting, or you can just do them completely plain. So I just need to stitch all of those on, and then once they're done they just all get pressed into place and any excess fabric can be cut off. So this is how it's going to look with all the different colours added on. So now to start assembling it, the first bit is to put the whites on either side of the leaves. So you need to add one to one side of the leaves to start with. They all get stitched on, and then they also get overlocked so that the finish is perfect on the inside, and then they get ironed into place. So once that's done, you need to then work on the other side and add the white to the other side of the leaf. So the process is exactly the same, just pin them all on, make sure you get it the right way round, and then they all just need to be sewn and then overlocked and ironed into place. Once those are done, then that whole piece needs to be added onto the smaller of the petals. So I'm just sewing it onto one side of the orange petals first. So it's always going to be the same process of just pinning, sewing and overlocking. So we'll do one side first on all of these petals, and that's how it's going to look. And then once you've got all of that done and pressed, then just do exactly the same on the other side. And you can see it all starting to take shape. And like I always do, I have to lay it down because I'm always really anxious to see how it looks, and I'm absolutely loving it at this stage. So the final bit of putting all of this skirt together is to put these big pieces now onto the red petals. So same process again, it's just a case of just keep building it up until you get the whole thing put together. So I've done one side on each of these, and then I'm really curious at this stage how it looks. So just pinning it on the mannequin to see how it all looks, so I can see it, how it looks 3D rather than just laid out on the floor. So now I just need to sew all of those panels together up the other side of the petals, just leaving an opening for the zip. So until this point, I actually thought the top of the dress was just going to be plain red. But once I saw it coming together, I decided having it at the top of the bodice was a much better idea. So I just have to figure out at this point exactly how I'm going to do it and how I'm going to position the petals to work well. So this is the first time I get to see it all together. So now I just need to work out the bodice. So it's just a really simple cut straight across neck, like a sundress kind of shape. So I'm using an existing pattern that I've got, hasn't got a seam allowance, and I'm just drawing out the shape so I can start then playing around with how the petals are going to sit on it. So I'm just following the big petal up the centre front, which is what I did on the mannequin. And my petal's got a seam allowance on, so I just need to make sure I take that off so it's exactly the right shape. So you can see the dart at the bottom there, so I'm just drawing it as far as that and just labelling it red because that's what it's going to be. So that's that one, and then I'm going to just draw in the white at the top because that's going to be my top edge. So just making sure I take the seam allowance off. So I'm filling in that little bit there. So you can see it's starting to look like what was on the mannequin now, and then just doing the next white one across. And then this is the actual seam line that I'm drawing in. So that's the bits on the top and the centre front, and then I just need to fill in the other pieces. So this is where the green leaf is, and then this is where the next petal along is going to go. So this is what I've decided to be in orange, and then it's going to have the green leaf in between. And this is how, at this stage, I thought it was going to look really good, but you'll see in a second how it didn't quite go to plan. So I wanted to leave this in just to show how things can go a little bit wrong. This is the back here. I just want to show how things can go a little bit wrong and how, if they do, you just really need to change it along the way. So this is all my little pieces, so it does get a little bit confusing. So I just need to cut all of those out and then cut them out of all of the colours that I've written on. And I keep them in position when I'm doing this. If not, it's just going to get so confusing when I come to sew it all together. And then this little piece here just needs a dart because that's the only one that has a bit of dart on it. So it's just a tiny little piece. So I'm just cutting all of these pieces out ready to put them all together. And there they all are. It's like a little jigsaw puzzle. And you can see now where it's not quite gone to plan, because I don't know about you, but those green bits positioned there, right on the bust point, are a bit of a strange focal point to a bodice. So this is not how I'm going to carry on doing it. It looks awful. So at this stage, I just decided to keep exactly the same layout, but change the colours. So the bits at the side become red, and where those little green bits were that were really obvious, they are now going to be done in orange, which I think you'll probably agree looks a lot better. So I just need to recut these out and then put the bodice together in exactly the same order as the skirt. I just need to do those little darts on the orange bit first, and then it all just goes together in exactly the same way as I did before. So now I get to see how it looks all sewn up on the mannequin, and this is obviously the dress you saw me wearing at the beginning. So it looks so much better just by changing those colours. So always take your time to redo things if you can see straight away that they just don't look right. So now I've got to just attach the skirt to the top on the waist seam. I left a little opening on the skirt for the zip that's going to go in a minute. So I'm just joining the waist here, and then I'll just overlock that to finish it off. And putting in the concealed zip. Concealed zip's always going to be better for something like this because you can basically just line the back up just like a seam, so it really is concealed at the back, and you can see there how perfectly it all lines up if you take time to do it well. And so the last little bit is just to add some straps on. So I'm going with the green because I lost the green off the bodice, and I thought that would just balance it out a little bit rather than having no green at the top at all. So I'm just making very basic straps and just bagging those out, and they just then get joined to the top edge. I just tried it on at this stage just to make sure the positions looked right, but I wanted to line them up with those orange petals. And then the very last bit is just to put the facing on, so that just gets joined around the top edge and understitched, and then it just gets bagged out around the zip. And then the very last bit is to do the hem. I actually hemmed each of these individual bits separately so the white stitching didn't go over the green.
You already saw it at the beginning, but here it is again, my finished dress with all of these pieces. You can see by the outfit changes in the video, it took me a while to put it all together, but it was so worth it because I absolutely love it. And if, like me, you put the top on and you think this just isn't right, it's not looking right, just unpick it, change it, because if not, you're never going to love your dress. It's worth the effort. If you liked this video, make sure you look at all of my other tutorials where there's even more detail on how to put together all of the dresses that I show.